I never walked in the mainstream. So I was walking in the dark side. I didn't care about trend.
Today, his eponymous brand offering both men's and women's clothing remains his most commercially successful venture, alongside the popular sub-labels Wise and youth line Ground Y, to its principal lines Pour Homme and Costume d'Homme. In 2018, the brand evolved yet again, expanding into a line of perfume. His innovation has led to groundbreaking collaborations and pop culture moments, working alongside household names of fashion, reinventing icons like Dr. Martens, whilst dressing icons of entertainment from Tina Turner to Elton John. Most particularly, his trailblazing Y3 range with the street sports giant Adidas spurned a new wave of cross-genre collaborations, paving the way for the now billion-dollar athleisure industry. Raised by his mother, who worked as a dressmaker, Yamamoto found himself identifying more with the women of his life. His compassion for the opposite gender would eventually present itself through the construction of his couture. His collections are built primarily around the comfort and confidence clothing can provide for women, uninterested in presenting them as objects of male desire.
His view of seeing women from behind, especially the neck and the backbone, that often actually he presents a collection which is fairly daring, like backless, for example, and it's all covered from front. And that's quite surprisingly sexy.
Upon his graduation at Bunker Fashion College, he moved to Paris to carve a name for himself in the world of fashion. But it was a difficult time for the young designer. He rented a tiny flat in the city and spent 9 months showcasing his freelance designs and sketches to fashion magazines, with little to no success.
So after graduate, I got a prize from school. So I was sent to Paris about 1 year.
His time in Paris, although unsuccessful, had convinced Yamamoto his calling was to become a designer.
I decided to come back to Japan and started helping mother again, just taking order and measurement and the cutting fabric and the fitting for many type of customers.
Outside the dressmaking shop, Yamamoto began to freelance on the side. His early designs set the template for the designs that would drive him to superstar status over the next decade. Asymmetrically cut clothing that was loose and elegantly layered, designed to conceal rather than reveal. A mysterious and elegant new form of chic that clashed with the rigid and geometrically precise lines that dominated Parisian fashion at the time. Typically, Japanese women were wearing imported and very feminine things, and I didn't like it. I jumped on the idea of designing coats for women. It meant something for me. The idea of a coat guarding a home, hiding the woman's body. Maybe I liked imagining what is inside.
Actually, I found it, especially Yohji's work, I think his work is actually highly sensual. Or sexy, actually, even. Only because it gives you actually a lot of imagination of what's underneath. And that's really more exciting than actually seeing everything like so in your face, really.
After working freelance for a number of years, Yamamoto decided it was time to open his first ready-to-wear boutique, Wise. However, just as it had been during his tenure in Paris, prospects as a store owner in those early years were bleak. His flowing armhole dresses of linen and woven cotton failed to make an impact on a Japanese market more interested in European and American fashion. It was during this time that Yamamoto found an ally and partner in Rei Kawakubo. The eclectic designer and founder of Comme des Garçons. Despite radically different temperaments, Yamamoto a relaxed, affable personality, quick to draw a smile, and Kawakubo the near inverse. They shared a commonality in couture. Both were attracted to the abnormal, unrestrained by conventional rules and tradition. Their aesthetic shared the same appreciation for the dirty, the imperfect, and the unencumbered. Through very different prisms, both were searching for a new way to design for women. It took a while to catch on, but eventually Yamamoto found his success. His first public collection in Tokyo in 1977 became an instant success, and Wise capitalized quickly as it expanded through the entire country. I had a map of Japan on the wall, and I had a pin for each city where I had a connection with a shop. By 1980, he had nearly covered the map. The time had come for Yamamoto to once again try his hand on the world stage. Ignoring his past failings, the designer opened a store in Paris in 1981. That same year, he debuted at Paris Fashion Week in a collaborative show with Kawakubo that shook the foundations of traditional expectation.
When you came to Paris and showed your clothes, were you conscious that what you were doing was so incredibly different to the fashion that existed?
Not at all. I was just thinking to open tiny shop in Paris. That's it. I didn't know such a movement, such a wind was blowing. I just wanted to open the shop.
Their dark, distressed, oversized garments bore no resemblance to anything that had ever been seen before, and sharply polarized the audience. The reaction from the Parisian press was bitter, and more divided than perhaps anything the fashion world had ever experienced. Influential trade paper WWD ran photos of the collection scarred with black crosses over the top, describing it as fit for intellectual bag ladies and little else. The publications lashed out at the designers, coining the collections as Hiroshima and Holocaust chic.
Everyone was still wearing high heels and sequins. Then this came along and we found it totally twisted. We didn't understand the proportions, the disproportions. Great clumpy shoes, women in flat shoes with messy hair and no makeup, with gigantic jumpers, and their clothes weren't even finished. They totally revolutionized European fashion.
Kawakubo, who actively sought to disrupt the status quo, relished her criticism. But for Yamamoto, the response was deeply upsetting. I was simply looking for the idea for myself, for my own excitement. So it was naturally out of trend, out of fashion. I was panicked by the reaction. I really felt I don't mean that. I'm not coming here to Paris to say something against the fashion. I just wanted to open my own small shop. That's it. Despite the protestations of critics, those same 30% who applauded the collection were converts to this new sense of design. It was better, it seemed, for people to react with love or hate than simple indifference. But for those who hated the collection, their crusade against this divergent form of fashion was far from over after that first showcase. From the next collection, it became a war, recalled Yamamoto. I didn't want a war, but too much attack made me fight.
Can you talk a little bit about what the reaction was like when you showed in Paris?
Because I knew afterwards, because that moment there were so many stuck situation in fashion. So especially buyers were looking for new designer. I didn't know that. So after giving my opening show, so many buyers rushed to my Paris office, and my office's elevator was broken by the buyers. I was shocked.
Yamamoto and Kawakubo, who had endured their own vitriol following her debut in Paris, upped the ante for their 1982 collection. Kawakubo launched her seminal collection, Destroy, an apocalyptic extension of her earlier work, further fueling the antagonism between her and her detractors. Yamamoto continued forging his own path. Together, they began to be seen as an invading wave of Japanese design. When one designer is thinking like that, there is not so much reaction, but because there were two, it meant the army from Asia. It was a curious statement for a designer whose influences had little to do with his own culture. While Japanese traditions were lightly reflected in the loose kimono drape of his designs, Yamamoto, like most of Japan at the time, found more interest in Europe and American aesthetic, particularly the formation of punk fashion, some 5 years prior to his Paris unveiling. Malcolm McLaren, godfather of punk, recalls both Yamamoto and Kawakubo as a pair of excellent customers when they arrived at his guerrilla store Sex during the late 70s. Like many counterculture followers through the decades, Yamamoto and Kawakubo were preoccupied with black. It was one of the most striking and divisive features of their early Paris collections, and perhaps the most attractive quality of their garments. Although they were hardly the first to introduce black to Parisian fashion, Coco Chanel's little black dress and the Yves Saint Laurent tuxedo spring to mind, there was an avant-garde quality to their use of the tone, a layered meaning that gave multiple context to a minimal design choice. Black is modest and arrogant at the same time, says Yamamoto. Black is lazy and easy, but mysterious. It means that many things go together, yet it takes different aspects in many fabrics. You need black to have a silhouette. Black can swallow light or make things look sharp. But above all, black says this: I don't bother you, don't bother me.
Objectively, they had really done their homework. I'm convinced that they knew full well what they were doing when they arrived in Paris, what they were going to turn upside down. It was no coincidence that they decided to arrive together. They probably wouldn't tell you that, but Rei Kawakubo and Yohji Yamamoto were together, you know.
They lived together for over 10 years, and they hid their creativity from each other. They didn't share information on their collection. It must have been totally schizophrenic. I once asked Yohji, in your private life, is Rei like this? And he said, no, she's very sweet.
When you arrived, both of you quite at the same moment, they had a tendency to put you together. What did you think of that?
I thought it is stupid to shout that I'm different.
The Yamamoto design aesthetic has evolved over the years, moving beyond the oversized silhouette of his early work and into the fitted couture representative of the times. Unlike many anti-fashion designers who deliberately work against the grain of the populist, Yamamoto is more concerned with following his own instinct and forging his own path than he is with the expectations of others. I hate to look back. I'm always looking forward to what's next. What can I do next? The only person he expects to outdo is himself. Each collection is designed to move him forward as a designer, as an artist. Yamamoto's career reached its zenith in the 1998 wedding collection. It confirmed the new romantic path he had taken as he shifted register from masculine to feminine. The catalyst was his study of haute couture. He pored over the neo-Edwardian gowns of the American designer Charles James at the Brooklyn Museum of Art in the summer of '99 when he was in New York to pick up an American Fashion Award. In the jigsaw of pattern pieces, he uncovered another designer's process. Around this hype, Yamamoto also became the sole subject of a Wim Wenders documentary, Notebook on Cities and Clothes. Perhaps this searching for new inspiration is what led him to becoming one of the first designers to bridge couture with sport. collaborating with Adidas to produce the iconic Y3 sneaker back in 2001, long before athleisure was introduced to mainstream culture. Y3 is the collaboration label between Adidas and Yamamoto, bringing the Japanese designer's sartorial aesthetics to the sports brand and resulting in a fusion of high fashion and advanced performance wear. Unveiled in Paris in 2002, the Y3 brand celebrated its 10th collection with the Autumn-Winter 07-08 men's and women's presentations in New York City. By 2016, Y3 Sport was launched, a capsule collection which focused on functionality. The popular range of sneakers proved to be a big hit amongst celebrities and fashion influencers, earning Yamamoto some serious street cred.
Around 15 years ago, it was a moment that fashion professional people, they started saying maestro, master. At that moment, I felt that I came too far from the street. I was almost losing my enthusiasm for making clothing. I had a big question. And then I watched around carefully the street in New York, street in Paris, street in Tokyo. There were so many running people. Time to care about the body. From my side, I made a phone call to Adidas directly, saying that I want to work with your company. Then, very quickly,
commercial schedule, with Yamamoto's first solo UK exhibition, celebrating his life and work as the key event at the acclaimed Victoria and Albert Museum. When Selfridges asked Yamamoto to design a skateboard for their spring 2014 boardroom concept, he answered with a deck that breathes new life into the iconography of the human skull, using profile X-rays of his own skull done years ago, which were then traced meticulously by hand. At this time, he continued to explore his urban aesthetic, joining forces with New Era, a US headwear brand hailing from Germany, whose iconic cap is the official gear of the National Football League. Under his sub-label Wise, Yamamoto worked with them to reignite their icon, the 5950 cap, with his graphic logo and insignias, and continued to release a series of headgear, including their most simplistic baseball cap to date, the 920, a blank cap with Yohji's signature. The collaboration evolved into a range including a line of apparel and accessories. The Spring-Summer 18 goods celebrated Yamamoto's rare turn to colour, featuring the skull and rose patterns from Yohji Yamamoto Homme's Fall-Winter 14 collection, followed by an expansive Fall-Winter offering back into his key monochromatic palette. In line with his historical film collaborations and ties to Japanese animation, Yamamoto's work was referenced in the 2017 remake of the cult film Ghost in the Shell, from Japanese director Takeshi Kitano. The Yakuza characters in the film were very Yamamoto-like in monochrome, loose, tailored numbers. Yamamoto, a fan of Kitano, as well as a colleague, having designed costumes for Kitano's late 90s film Brother, answered back with a capsule line joint released with designer Fred Perry. Ground Y, Yamamoto's more price-friendly line, brought to life the Ghost in the Shell capsule collection, which included Perry's own polo and Yamamoto's subtle design elements emblazoned with stylized illustrations from the manga series.
We became like a friend like 6-7 years already. So we do many things together, officially or privately. When Takeshi wants to speak very important thing, he doesn't speak. He brings something to me. So at the very, very first fitting of the two main characters, I showed to Kitano one couple, which is for autumn season. He jumped from the chair and he ran to the clothes, and he started touching the clothing, and in a way he got excited at that moment.
2018 saw Yohji Yamamoto also pair up with Ishimori Productions, honoring the late Shotaro Ishinomori's iconic Cyborg 009 manga character. The knitted apparel and t-shirt featured the vintage manga characters and villain in a striking pop culture reference as manga nears its 52nd anniversary. In 2019, Yamamoto returned to Paris with his critically acclaimed Spring-Summer collection held in the historic Grand Palais. Though he is still the patriarch of black, in recent years he has introduced a broader palette, continuing to work into his repertoire bold colour and loud prints for summer. The darkened space was defined by the accompanying music, written in part by Yamamoto himself. It represented his defiance of destructive forces by replying with an anti-racism, anti-crazy global warming, anti-genderless fashion, presenting a concept that clearly defined his vision for men and women as equal and separate. With signature oversized cuts and tailoring for the men, and beautifully unstructured drapery for the women that formed around the female body, across the line of dresses and outerwear, and in later moments presented a more sensual silhouette with hardware and slithers of skin. His final act was an all-white color palette that moved into bright colors, casting 5 black models to open and close the show. Whilst the clothes spoke for themselves, his abstract anti-vision may have been lost on critics, but it is more complicated than being just lost in translation. According to Vogue's Amy Werner, Yamamoto has remained relevant precisely because there are so many unknowable aspects to his work, and people respect him immensely without overthinking why or how a collection materializes. Recent seasons have yielded themes that fluctuate between cheeky and profound, as though he is working through how to express himself in his advancing years. At a time when the gender-neutral movement is afoot, Yamamoto's presentation is at odds with the times, but it is less a battle against the cause than it is a means of reconnecting identity through clothing, with the brand as ever determined to forge their own path. Before this, his Fall 18 showing in Paris was one of the most poignant to date, venerating the late fashion vanguard, friend, and contemporary Azzedine Alaïa. His passing disrupted Yamamoto's usual process, coming to him almost in a vision that challenged the sculptural fashion made famous by Azzedine against the master of Cubism, Pablo Picasso. This level of championing another designer, especially in a show, is not a common occurrence in the world of fashion. It was a moment that collided the unlikely masters, whom, like two sides of a coin, were equally valued for their contribution. The collection placed notes of sculptural details, from the oversized collars and lapels, amidst Yamamoto's own signature volume with deconstructed cubist moments that even went three-dimensional. The patchworked leather corsets and classic tailored coats resembled some affinity with the king of cling, not unnoticed by Alaïa's inner circle, whom were in attendance for the touching tribute. There was not a dry eye in the house. The catharsis even took a toll on Yamamoto himself. Emotionally and physically, the last of the long-standing designers to remain staunchly independent and maintain relevant collaborations across several decades. In his life, Yamamoto has managed to capture his craft, memories, and musings in a holistic autobiography unlike anything else. My Dear Bomb encapsulates his style and his efforts to understand his critics as part of his personal evaluation. It is not chronological, rather a fusion of poetry, anecdotes, and trade notes. His previous publications, Talking to Myself and Wise Yohji Yamamoto, are an open door into the genius of Yamamoto. At 75, Yamamoto has always disregarded the idea of retirement and practices fierce dedication to the craft and his team. Certainly, this renegade of fashion will fight off his final chapter.
Black. This dark side of the life, not in the light, is attractive for me forever. Too good harmony is boring. Maybe conflict. I'm not interested in this fashion, generally. I'm just interested in how to cut the clothing. Dressmaking, clothing making, cannot lie.